Welcome to the Women in Agriculture Learning Network webinar, Unpacking the Farm Labor Puzzle. I'm Beth Holtzman, and I coordinate the Women in Ag Learning Network. I will be moderating the session. Lisa Scarborough from Iowa State University will be handling the technical aspects of the webinar. Today's webinar is the second session in a mini-series on ag labor. The first session focused on labor law as it applies to agricultural businesses. Our presenter today is Mary Peabody, Director of the Women's Ag Network in Vermont. Mary is part of a multi-state research team that spent the last year visiting with small and medium-sized diversified vegetable farm operators to learn what labor practices help increase the odds of having a good farm employee experience. In this 30-minute webinar, Mary will take a look at the tips and strategies these farmers shared as their best practices in recruiting, training, and retaining farm employees. Remember, your mics will be muted during the presentation, but we encourage you to use the chat box to type in questions as we go along, and we will get to as many as we can before wrapping up today. With that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Great. Thanks, Beth, and thanks, everybody, for joining. This is a little bit out of our usual time frame, so I'm a little sort of discombobulated around the time here. But anyway, we're going to be talking, as Beth said, about some tips and strategies that we've collected over the past 2 years from over 70 farmers who have very generously shared their stories successful and not successful about hiring employees. And for those of you that webinar with Rachel Armstrong, check out the recording of that because she covered a lot of legal territory. So we will be covering some of the non-legal stuff that you need to be thinking about or that you might want to be thinking about. So, okay, well, let's start with why labor matters. And let me also just say that the grant is in its, we're just entering our final year, so we're going to start rolling out a lot of stuff today, and we're going to...
So basically, just to go back and recap, why labor is a big deal. Well, obviously, it's a significant expense, and small and medium-sized farms don't always have the extra cash on hand to be thinking about payroll. As the local food movement grows up and as there's more demand for local products, not having enough labor is a real barrier to scaling up. And in some parts of the country, we're seeing very scarce labor pools, which is, another one of those issues that farmers have to negotiate because you're unfortunately not just competing anymore with just the farmers in your region. You're competing with all entry-level positions in a region. As you know, there's increasing regulatory barriers, and some of those, we've seen some of those pop up in some of the legal conversations around interns and apprentices on farms, and we've also had lots of immigration reform debate, which has sort of raised the conversation level around, quote-unquote, importing farm workers. So all of that is combined with, in the states at least, that we're working with on this particular study, which is Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and Vermont, is up against the seasonal nature of work, which is that we still don't have a lot of farms that have full-time, year-round types of positions that they're needing and wanting to fill. So again, these are all sort of complicated issues that farmers need to sort of think about and navigate, all the while still trying to operate. And the other piece is that labor is this complex integration of, sort of the legal issues, and you heard a lot about those on Tuesday if you were on for our discussion. But there's also economic implications, there's social and cultural factors at play. So all combined, it's a complicated sort of a thorny issue. So what have we been doing to date? Well, I'll just quickly go through this. In 2014, we had some focus groups, which many farmers around our states participated in, gave us some feedback. We also did some focus groups with educators and technical assistance providers to sort of try to suss out what some of the big issues were. Then we moved on and we did interviews, and as I said earlier, we've interviewed about 70 people, most of them farmers, And we're now sort of in the final phases of the coding and analysis of that. And from there, we'll be developing a survey, which hopefully many of you that are listening to this will be able to participate in and will help sort of further our knowledge along about what are sort of the barriers and opportunities in labor management. So, all right, let's cut to the chase here while we still have some time left and think about what's going on in labor. So the cycle of employment on a farm, or really on any small business, generally follows these four processes. Recruiting is the time you spend preparing to hire and seeking out your potential pool that you're going to draw from. It's very much a marketing strategy, and so no surprise, the farmers that have the most success in this area also happen to be the ones that have really strong marketing skills in the rest of their farm business. Hiring includes everything up to and including the offer of employment. All too often, that's the bubble that gets the lion's share of a farmer's attention, when really in many ways it's the most straightforward. Training and orientation sort of obviously follows the offer of employment, and it's really about getting the employee off to a successful start in your business. And evaluation is how you follow up and communicate with the employee, whether that's to reward good work, correct faulty work, or just to check in on how things are working out. Probably no surprise, this is the area that most often gets really shortchanged. Farms are busy places, and it can be just plain hard to find the time to do these kinds of check-ins. But what we learned through talking with our farmers was that this part is really important, and the more often you do it, the more often you can prevent problem situations from getting worse and escalating. So we'll spend some time on each one of these four bubbles now. So recruiting, again, as I said, is all of the work that you're going to do before you make the decision really to hire. So, and before you do that, you need to sit down and determine two things. One is, what is it that you want to achieve in your business that would justify hiring an employee? And the second is, where do you want that employee to take your business? So understanding the economics of hiring someone is critical, but it's really secondary to understanding your goals and your plans for the season. So where is your business in terms of its maturity curve? Are you still growing, in which case your labor needs are going to be growing right along with your business? Are you where you want to be in terms of annual revenue, or are you sort of flattening out the curve here, and you're sort of at a stable place where you want to sort of stay for a little while, in which case your labor needs may stay pretty constant, and they'll be easy to plan for. Are you considering scaling back? And we did hear on several occasions that this was an option that surfaced largely because of the shortage of good labor, and because people just were not able to surmount some of the problems around finding the right labor pool. The other thing you want to be thinking about is there something happening in your family that's going to impact your current workforce? For example, having a baby, an injury, an aging parent that needs care. Remember, in addition to the hourly wage that you're going to be paying, there are other expenses associated with hiring employees. You've got payroll taxes, workers' comp, benefits. If you're hiring an employee to replace a family member that isn't drawing a salary from the business, you have a revenue gap that you need to address. So it's important to be thinking about all of this as you go. And along with new hires, you may well see some increased inefficiencies. New unskilled workers are just slower and more awkward at first. They're not going to be working at the same pace as maybe you are, or your partner is, or somebody who's been on that farm for years. You may see some increased breakage because nobody's going to treat your equipment as carefully as you do. And then time lost to management. Whoever is supervising these employees is going to find that they need some extra hours to focus on those kinds of management duties in order to do them well. So can your farm afford to pay a competitive wage? That's another question you're going to sort of have to think about. And although there are minimum wage laws in place, and if you joined us on Tuesday, you heard that you may or may not be subject to those laws, but still the more likely scenario is that your competition for entry-level jobs is probably going to drive what you need to pay more than the minimum wage laws. So start by just being aware of what the employment market looks like where you live. If you're seeing help wanted signs in every window and yard as you drive around, then that's probably a sign that entry-level worker pool is getting tapped out. Explore your options for employment. Have you explored H-2A programs? This is the Federal Visiting Worker Visa Program. It's definitely not for everybody, but we did hear clearly from a number of the folks that we interviewed that it was the solution to staying in business for some of them. There are also interns. I have to say, I was surprised when we were looking through the data that we were collecting at how frequently I heard absolutely not in response to the question of, do you use interns on your farm? Because I get a lot of questions about interns from farmers. But in part, I think it was a reaction to some of the recent attention that's being paid to the legal status of interns and the need for payment for them. And I think also it was a function of the fact that many of the farms that we were interviewed were in sort of a growth trajectory, and that they were more focused on having an employee core, a farm crew that was going to focus on work rather than on the need for training and teaching. So I think that's probably why we heard so frequently that interns were not an option on those farms. You know, that said, there were a few farmers that said interns are the heart and soul of their farm, and they love the opportunity to have interns on the farm, and that experience is an integral part of their mission. So I would say if teaching and mentoring is integral to who you are as a person, certainly interns can be a workable solution for you, but you need to go into that with your eyes open. So when it comes to recruiting that pool of applicants, we heard often that the best source of new employees was former employees. If you have employees that worked well on your farm, be sure to tell them that you're looking for help for the coming year and ask for their help in spreading the word. Their social networks can be invaluable to you. Have a standard job description so that you can be clear about what job or jobs you're hiring for. There are templates available online, and even your word processing packages have templates you can customize pretty easily. Start the recruitment process early. We heard time and time again, if you wait until February or March, you may find yourself scrambling and be behind the curve. This is especially true if you are in an area with very low unemployment and you're competing for a very small pool. Be flexible in what you want. For example, at least one farmer we talked with had success hiring parents, mostly moms of young school-age children, and they live in the area. They generally have reliable transportation, and they're hard workers. The downside is that they can't start until the kids are at school or daycare. They sometimes have conflicts with illness or vacations. But if you can be flexible with your hours, this might be an option for you. And this particular farm was using this crew of young moms in the community to come and do washing and packing. So it worked out pretty well because they were able to be very flexible with the hours. And it's gone on for several years now, so they've actually had people coming back every single season. So that's worked out well for them. To the extent that you can be flexible in how you schedule, you might be able to attract a more non-traditional pool. We also heard that newly retired seniors are a good source of help. At least two of the farmers that we interviewed have a retired person in charge of all their mechanic work. Again, the hours are flexible, it's a specialized set of skills, but some people just thrive on tinkering with equipment. And so if you can get those kind of people and you can sort of slot them into these specialized positions, that can really help free other workers up for other stuff. If you rely on college students, we all know this, but it doesn't always help. But if you rely on college students, you need to understand that they will be heading back to school in mid-August, and that leaves you with a significant chunk of time that you still need help and don't have a workforce. So we had a number of farmers share with us that they offer an end-of-season bonus for those employees who stay for the entire season. That doesn't work for the college student population, obviously, but it does gain you enough other workers that you can get by once the students all leave with at least a workable-sized crew. So we don't have enough time today to get into the whole benefits arena, but I will say that, again, when it comes to benefits, what we heard again and again, the more flexibility and creativity you can bring to the table, the better. Always ask your potential employees what matters to them when it comes to working environment and benefits, because it's not always what we assume. So we'll move on to the next bubble here. We'll do some hiring. The hiring process is not the place to take shortcuts. We heard that pretty clearly. For the most part, every time we heard a horror story about an employment situation going wrong, it was because one or more of these steps was omitted. Standard applications help you collect information that you'll need later, so it can be a time saver. It also ensures that from the start, everyone's being treated the same, and it sort of sets the tone for a professional relationship. Screening the applicants will lead you to the interview stage. The advice was don't wait too long to get back to applicants. Good employees are applying to more than one position, and their shelf life is pretty short. So if you find somebody you think is a good fit for your farm, call them and set up something quickly. A few words about interviews. We heard face-to-face is better than phone or Skype or FaceTime, but at least Skype or FaceTime allows you to see the person, so if you can't literally be sitting at the same table, then one of those options is better than just a phone call. On the farm is better than remote. Talking less and listening more is key. We heard several times people talking about sort of how they had to learn to hone their interview skills over time and had to really focus on figuring, how to actually ask the right questions so that people could talk and they could just be quiet and listen, because there's a lot of information that is imparted both in what people say and in how they say it. So know what you can and cannot ask in an interview situation. You want to be careful about that. Don't be afraid to probe a little on gaps in work history or unexplained missing time. Several people mentioned that they wish they had asked more questions about the materials that they were provided. Do check references. Even though the information you get is likely to be guarded and incomplete, you can tell a lot from the tone of the conversation. And you can always ask if they would hire that person again given the chance. That's a tip that several farmers shared and said, I wish that I had asked this, and once I started asking this, I was able to sort of dial in a little bit deeper on some of these things. The employment letter that you give to your potential hires should spell out the terms of the job, including the rate of pay, the hours that are expected, any special provisions. We were all over the map in terms of, what farmers are telling their new employees about clothing, what's appropriate clothing, and again, if you're working with brand new entry-level people, there's nothing that you can leave unsaid. You have to be very specific. If they need to bring gloves, then you need to say that. If you want them to wear hats, then you need to say that. If you want, if you want to remind them about bug spray or sunscreen or whatever it is, those are things that you don't necessarily need to spell it all out in the employment letter per se, but you do need to make sure that they understand that, because that's not necessarily information that they would understand. This is also the time, at the time that you're offering the employment and you're giving this letter of hire, this is the time that you present the policy manual to the employee and ask that they review it before they start so they can clarify any questions that the employee might have, either on the first day or during the orientation or before they start, because you don't want people starting with a lot of unanswered questions. We heard a lot of folks say, listen to your gut. If you're unsure about an applicant, it might be better to pass. We heard many, many times hiring the wrong employee can use up a lot of time and energy, and in many cases be worse than having no employee at all. We were cautioned about the friends and family clause. Friends and family should be treated the same way as all other employee hires, meaning, your neighbor calls up, you love your neighbor, they say, oh, I have a niece that needs a job this summer, could you use some extra help? Your response should be, yes, we are hiring on our farm for this summer, and I'd be happy to send him or her an application and go from there. But in no case should you circumvent the application interview process, that you really need to put everybody through there, because for obvious reasons, this could end up being not just a bad employee situation, but it could also damage the relationship. So if you have a relationship with somebody, the best thing you can do is just keep everything on a business and professional level. And I see, we're going to run out of time here. So training. Do have an orientation. A good orientation sets the stage for a good work environment. Offer a tour of the entire operation so that people can see the whole spectrum of the business. And, you know, it just helps them feel like their little piece, what they're contributing is a part of the whole, and they need to understand what the whole is. A personnel policy manual is really important. This is where you can communicate things like what to do if you're going to be late or can't work your shift, spells out the expectations for when employees get paid and what benefits are included. It also spells out the expectations around things like breaks and lunchtime and where food can be stored, and does the farmer offer any incentives, pay incentives, and if so, what are they? And also include a technology policy. Cell phones were probably among the most discussed thing in all of the interviews across the board. Some farmers depend on it for communication. Some farmers love to be able to text people from remote fields and say, okay, we're having a team meeting here in 15 minutes, come on up. Other people can't stand having cell phones and employees with cell phones because they feel like all they do is stand around and text their friends and Facebook pictures. So, you know, whatever your stance in, it doesn't matter. You've just got to be clear about what it is that you're expecting from your employees, because you can't hold people accountable for things that they don't really understand. And another big one that came up, you know, be really clear about who this employee is reporting to. Avoid situations where an employee is reporting to multiple people. For obvious reasons, it's confusing, it's stressful for the employee, and it's unprofessional. And we had many farmers in instances where, you know, we were talking to two people and they would say, you know, until we actually sort of got together, we didn't even realize that we were both giving these employees conflicting orders. So it's good to sort of have a quote-unquote chain of command. When you're training somebody, do it in manageable chunks. Nobody can take in everything in a single day. I think sometimes we forget how much information we've accumulated and how much minutia and detail we understand about our business. So it's just good policy to use this tell, demonstrate, observe, tell, show, observe kind of thing, where you tell them what you expect, you show them how to do it, and then you have them do it while you watch, and then you make any corrections that are necessary. And that's, you know, and then try to communicate the why, because, you know, most people are curious enough to know why is it that we need to do it this way? How important is this? You know, and one of the classic stories was a farmer who said, you know, I didn't actually think that I needed to tell them to check all the fluid levels in the tractor before they headed down to this field in the, you know, that was furthest away. But lo and behold, it turns out I did, because they ran out of gas and we wasted an hour between them walking back, trying to find a canister, trying to find the truck, getting back down there, filling up the thing. It was ridiculous. And so now I understand. I have to explain to them, check all the fluid levels before you leave the farm. So again, it just goes back to the, you can assume nothing with new employees. Have clear expectations and benchmarks. Everyone is slow when they're first learning to do something, so you can and should expect improvement over time, but you still want to let them know what the expectation is. Is it a certain number of cases of lettuce harvested in an hour? Is it quarts of berries picked? You know, how are you going to measure their performance? Frequent check-ins are necessary for new employees to be sure they get off to a good start. It gets harder to correct behavior the more deeply it's embedded. And if you have multiple workers, we heard from several farmers that have larger operations that a crew leader can be really helpful in getting crews organized and helping with the training and expectations. And so the last stop on this employee labor cycle was evaluation. And again, as I said earlier, this is what gets shortchanged most often. But feedback is really critical, and doing it more often is better than less often, especially for new employees. You know, we heard, you know, when you see somebody doing a good job, make a point of saying something and giving them that positive feedback. Praise is better than criticism. And criticism can be heard better when there's also been praise involved. And since we live in an age of smartphones, it's quick and easy and very possible to make short videos of good farm practices. So if there are things that you absolutely want to make sure that people understand, you can take really short videos. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be highly edited. And then you can post those so that if an employee needs a refresher, it's easy for them to find and watch. And regardless of whether you're handling out praise or criticism, put it in writing. It creates a paper trail down the road if you need one, but it also gives your feedback some extra weight. There's something about having something in writing that just feels more important and more legitimate. Policies need to be clear, written, and consistent. And a big one was avoid playing favorites. It will create tension in work crews, and sometimes I think it's just a subconscious thing. I mean, we all have people in groups that we just like better, or we just sort of feel a better connection with than other people. But when you're the boss, it makes a big difference in the work environment. And if you're having a difficult conversation with an employee, say what you need to say, and then give them the time to reflect and come back at it another time. So I know we went a few minutes over, so thank you for hanging in there, and I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. But I will say at the beginning I said I would invite you to join us, and if you're interested, this link is to our blog, which you can keep an eye out. We'll start rolling out some things there. And there's an email where you can reach us on the team as well. And I will take a couple minutes if there's anybody who has any quick questions. And I'm also happy to take questions offline as well. And I see Beth has put up the link to a very short evaluation, and that would be really helpful. If you could take a few minutes and go there. Yeah, oh, Mimi, yes. Do you have anything to add about formal evaluations? Yes. Ideally, do them. I think you can learn a lot from exit interviews. I will say that they are pretty uncommon on the farms that we interviewed, largely because of time. But I think on the handful of farms that were doing it, they said it helped them enormously to understand what they, as bosses and managers, could be doing better, what systems didn't work out very well on the farm, when communications were unclear. Because sometimes you think things are crystal clear because it's crystal clear in your head, and then in the translation, especially if you have, crews or crew leaders, you tell the crew leaders something. By the time the crew leaders get around to telling other people, it can be second, third, fourth-hand information. So definitely do them if you can find time. And again, we'll be putting up some templates about those kinds of interventions. And again, as I said, we're still sort of in the final data coding and analysis phase. So this is a really rich data set. We have lots more information to share, and we'll be sharing it out over the coming year. So this is the very tip of the iceberg. If there's things that you especially want to know, please let us know, and we'll make every effort to get something out. Okay, so Mimi's question is how employee management differs on a farm versus other work environments. Well, so the answer is it depends. On farmers that have H-2A workers, it tends to be a little bit different because you're working with a crew that is there on a visa. They're there to do a particular job, and they're living and working in the same place. So you don't have the sort of come and go. And you also have some cultural elements that play a role in it. They're there to work. They are very hard workers by and large, very focused on getting the job done, and not quite as invested, I guess is the word I would use, in learning all aspects of the farm, as opposed to a lot of farmers that we interviewed that hired, say, college students or interns or a lot of the folks that were coming out to work on these farms were interested in starting their own farm someday. And so they were real sponges for information. And on the one hand, the farmers were very flattered that they were able to mentor and help. On the other hand, they felt that sometimes it was a distraction, that they were focused on all aspects when really the farmer just wanted a field crew to, weed and hoe and cultivate and things like that. So I'm not sure if that exactly gets to your question, but there are some differences for sure. I mean, the hours are different. The work hours and expectations are very often different, although not universally so. Some farms have very specific, it's an 8-hour day, it's a 40-hour week. So again, I'll thank everybody for putting up with our technical glitch at the beginning. We're 10 minutes over, but again, I'm happy to take questions, and if you have any follow-up comments, I'm happy to visit with you more as we go.